And now, from the Room 111 studios, it's Hacking Engagement with James Sternovich.
Hey there, listener. Welcome back to the Hacking Engagement podcast. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm impressed with myself that I'm back again so quickly. I'm just feeling podcasting right now. There's just a lot of great topics out there. And today's episode is a fabulous one. Now, I think every educator has heard this. In fact, I'd be shocked if you haven't heard this. Maybe if you have really small students, really young kids, you might not have heard this, but I'll bet everybody's heard this. I didn't do well on this assessment because I have test anxiety. You probably heard a kid say that before. Now, the fact that every teacher has heard this, or most teachers have heard this, should be a red flag. Now, certainly a bit of test anxiety is healthy. I mean, you have to have the motivation to study. The problem is when test anxiety results in diminished performance. Now, not only is this stressful and demoralizing for the student, which is a real negative, which is a real tragedy, but it also creates inaccurate results. You know, if you freeze on a test and you're unable to show what you know or show what you are capable of, then that assessment is inaccurate. We need to do better. Assessment should be less like Judgment Day and more like growth events. And this is where Aaron Cook, the Director of Secondary Curriculum and Assessment at the Delaware City Schools in suburban Columbus, makes a dramatic appearance. Aaron is an assessment savant. In this episode, he'll promote assessing the whole child. My wife and I strive to eat a whole foods diet. We feel a lot better when we're not scarfing down all those preservatives that we can't even pronounce. So a whole child approach to assessment, it has to be just as healthy. Not only will Aaron's ideas inspire you to empower your students through assessment, but it'll also guide you to create a much more accurate probe of what your students can accomplish, what your students are capable of doing. Demonstrating student learning, all those things will be much more accurate. Buckle up, man. This is an important episode. Here's my elevator pitch for my brand new book, Teaching in Magenta. This book provides 100 ways to create a magnificent day in your classroom. Once you start stringing some magenta days together, you and your students will experience profound well-being and deep joy. That's Teaching in Magenta, which is now available on Amazon's virtual shelves. So here we are in the Room 111 studios on another just spectacular Ohio May afternoon. And I'm actually morning. Yeah, it's still morning. What am I thinking here? And I'm talking to one of my new friends. His name is Aaron Cook. Say hello, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron.
and you're at work. You're stuck in an office today. I feel for you, man. I mean, but at least do you have a good window?
Yes, I have a great window. I'm looking out at Ohio Wesleyan's campus from my window.
I'll bet that's a nice view. I'll bet that's green and just beautiful.
Yeah, the weather here in Delaware, Ohio, is great today.
It is great. I mean, like probably low 70s, not a cloud in the sky. I mean, I could get used to this, my friend. Hey, get this. This is a wonderful title. You are the Director of Secondary Curriculum and Assessment for the Delaware City Schools in suburban Columbus. That is quite a mouthful. What exactly do you do?
Well, it's funny. So I am very blessed and grateful that I get to serve Delaware, our community, and our families and students in this role. But a few years ago, when after a year or two of doing this, somebody was pursuing their master's degree and went around and interviewed curriculum directors all over Central Ohio. And I was the last person, and he was at the end. He's like, "It is really funny. All of you, and I've interviewed a dozen of you, have the same title, but you do drastically different things. You have some commonalities, but do different things." So certainly work with our principals, and in terms of teaching and learning, working with our staff on some curriculum adoption pieces. But we also do things with training around restorative practices, sheltered instruction. I oversee with my elementary colleague, Joe Ewer, our gifted program, our English learner program. I'm our homeless liaison to the state of Ohio. I oversee College Credit Plus. We have an alternative education program for at-risk students at the Willis Education Center in downtown Delaware that serves as central office and a community partnership. But we have about 40 to 50 high school students and a team of 5 wonderful educators that work with those students to help them graduate and get jobs once they graduate.
Wow. So you are a busy guy.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
But, after having said all that, and you're passionate about all those things, you're pretty darn passionate about assessment, aren't you?
Yes.
Me too. And so I was really excited to have you come on the program today. We're going to talk about your visit to my classroom here soon. But, you're one of those guys, Aaron, and you're 41, correct?
I am 41.
That's a great age, man. I love being 41. And I will tell you this. You have a reputation around Central Ohio for being a really promising administrator who understands things, has great skills, and is highly sought after. So that's your reputation, my friend. Now, when I bring on a fellow educator, I'm always interested in their journey. So you've accomplished a lot at age 41, and what do you attribute this to?
Well, first, those are very kind words.
Well, you're welcome.
So thanks for sharing that information. I've been fortunate, blessed to be around wonderful people, learn from wonderful people. I'll certainly give my parents, Brian and Janet, a shout out. My dad's taught. I was a middle school teacher for 40 years. I had some great teachers and coaches in Mount Vernon City Schools growing up. I hate giving shout outs because I'm always going to leave some people out. Yeah. But certainly my John Fry and Mr. and Mrs. Cunningham as some math and science teachers at Mount Vernon High School. Yeah. Mr. Deem as a math teacher at the middle school. Some of my basketball, soccer coaches, and that list goes on. But they just took an interest in me and pushed me and encouraged me to be successful. And then I think same thing with professors at college, whether that's Dr. Brown or Dr. Bennett, Dr. Warren. And then I became a math teacher in Marysville, Ohio, and had the pleasure to serve that great community. But I even think to Joe Sigfirth, who was a superintendent of a prominent district up north and happened to be the father of one of my now wife's best friend in college.
Wow.
Just kind of took me under his wing even in awesome. College and invited me to come shadow him for a day in his life and just really encouraged me like, hey, I know you want to be a teacher, but we need individuals like you to be principals and administrators and superintendents. And
so he planted the seed.
He planted that seed in my head at 19 years of age.
I was going to ask you that question. I'm glad you answered that already.
Because my father, I think there's always that time teachers can be critical of administrators.
No.
and get frustrated. And sometimes we have, as administrators, good ideas, and sometimes we don't. We're flawed humans just like everybody else. And so
decisions.
I think my dad certainly didn't put that nugget in my head, but this person did. And my dad's come around because I'm like, we need good administrators in education to create environments for teachers to be able to be successful. So we've come to have some healthy conversations around that piece. And then lastly, I've had principals and superintendents that I've worked with that have grown me, sent me to conferences, pushed my thinking. So I certainly want to give a shout out to Kathy McInnes and Brad Faust and Andy Hatton, Heidi Kegley, Paul Kraft, Diane Allen, and Stan McDonald, who just would ask high quality questions, and they took an interest in me as a person, but also me as an educator, and just gave lots of encouragement. So wow. I think I've been driven, but I've also been really blessed to have people that come up in my life that have helped me grow and progress and set goals.
You are 2 for 2. I mean, I've asked you 2 questions, and you've given me 2 magnificent answers. Outstanding, thorough answers. I love it. So, like, well, you were one of these guys, you started teaching, and all of a sudden you were thinking, okay, this is what I want to do for now and learn, but this isn't going to be the end for me. I'm going to matriculate to other roles. So you were a teacher, and now you're a secondary curriculum and assessment director. And then in between, I know that you were a principal, high school principal, right?
Yep, I've been a middle school and high school principal, assistant principal.
Beautiful.
Wow. Some of the best and most challenging jobs are the middle school and high school principalship.
You were a high school principal as a young man.
I was young.
How old were you?
As an assistant principal, I was 30. As a head principal, at 33.
That's awesome, man. That's impressive. What great experience. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, great experiences with great staffs, great teachers, great administrators to work with, and 2 great districts.
Well, Aaron's got a magnificent head of hair that he inherited from his father, and I'm very jealous about that. And I want you to project 10 years into the future when you're 51. I'm certain that hair is still going to be locked in place. It might be a little gray around the edges, but it's going to be. You're going to have a great. You're going to have some great head of hair at 51. What a blessing! What do you see yourself doing on? Let's see. What's the date today? It is. Let me look here. We're recording this on May 19th. So what are you doing on May 19th, 2031? That's terrifying to think of.
May 19th, 2031. So I hope to still have my hair, but I'm sure it will be completely silver at that point.
It's going to be there, man.
My partner in crime, Chris, my wife, calls me a silver dapple at this point. So I will definitely be in education in some way, shape, or form. Even with this past year in the pandemic and the challenges it's presented, it has certainly highlighted the importance of the work that teachers and the important role that education plays for our students, families, and society. So I'm extremely passionate about teaching and learning and how we can grow and dream big with respect to how education takes place. I will say that helping out with your classes a few weeks ago definitely has me wanting that itch of being an adjunct professor, not as a full-time gig because I love the K-12 space, but being able to, whether it's in the evening or
summer,
summer to teach future teachers or principals is important work.
It is, man. And you'd be great at it. And speaking of that experience, I brought Aaron to my class a couple weeks ago. I was teaching assessment and intro. And so he was just like the perfect guest presenter. And in the first class, the intro class, well, I'm not gonna take away your thunder. You describe that experience.
So it was a blast. I couldn't stop talking about it when I got home. To the extent my kids were like, "Are you going to quit your job and go do something else?" But kudos to you, because you certainly set me up to be successful in that classroom. The environment and climate and culture that you have with those students. From the moment I walked onto campus and you greeted me outside the education building, you were interacting with students walking by you. You could tell that even if they weren't in your class, you'd built relationships. We walked into the building through like the community space where students, not kids, are hanging out doing their work. And they all wanted to talk with you and stop by your office. So stepping into that classroom and getting to work with future teachers and be your guest teacher was awesome. It
was fun. Thank you for those kind words, man. That was great.
It's always been a dream of mine. So I don't know who planted this seed, but in college, I always wanted to eventually teach at the college level, and being in your class reaffirmed that I need to figure out a way to make that happen, from making connections with universities to finding the time and the funds to pursue a doctorate degree to open up even more doors at the collegiate level.
That's perfect. And it's interesting, you and I discussed this, that, take a liberal arts college like Ohio Wesleyan or Muskingum, where I teach, and the schools are struggling some because not many students want to be history majors, philosophy majors, political science majors, English majors anymore. They all want to have their very expensive college experience prepare them for something. And so the good news for education departments is, it's a highly, highly relevant major. If you're going to be a teacher, you got to do it. So that's the good news. I brought you on today because you get assessment. You really get it. And a lot of people talk about it like kind of, I don't know, in almost a philosophical, big picture mode. And you get that, but you also get the detail, the nuts and bolts for it. When I brought Aaron into my class, he talked about the Ohio assessment system for teachers, which is, perfect. Assessment is intense. Why do you think even the subject of assessment is so intense for parents, for kids, for teachers, everybody gets pretty intense when you talk about assessment. Why do you think that is?
Assessment's personal. It's been done to us as students. We've all been students at one time or the other. Assessment can be high stakes. And we tend to, when we do think of assessments, and I'm talking from educators to just parents to students, we tend to think of exams, placement tests, state assessments, college entrance assessments, etc. And what those do, if you think about the definition of assessment, it means literally to evaluate, to assign value.
Yeah, that's good.
That creates a power dynamic between the assessor, the teacher, and the student taking the assessment. And so if I go to my restorative practices training, we talk about as much as possible in the social discipline window to do things with students, not to students and not for students, but with them. And in a traditional assessment sense, we do this to students. Mm-hmm.
I heard that in the first statement you made. We've all had assessment done to us, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. And in its crudest form, if we go way back to early IQ assessments, that started around World War I.
Oh, gosh,
and the original IQ assessment was taken out of context a little bit, and it put into place to rank and sort soldiers into what they would be capable of doing, from officers to different parts of the infantry. And then that led into SAT testing.
Yes, it did.
In the 30s and 40s, that once again, for our military academies, as we were going into World War II and we were looking for good officers, and then elite institutions on the East Coast, such as Harvard, started using the SAT to rank and sort students.
Yeah.
And I am in a K-12 space where sometimes, and as a high school teacher, you've probably heard this phrase, middle school teachers, I got to get students ready for high school. High school teachers, I got to get students ready for college or the workforce.
Yep.
And they're going to have these high stakes tests, so we got to give them. Whoa, we're in control of our classroom. We're in control of our environment. We want students to be able to learn and grow. And assessment also leads into grading, which is another highly intense subject and personal thing. Go ahead.
Here's one thing I was thinking about when you were talking there. And first of all, it was a couple things. Number one, all of those things that you listed sounded anxiety-producing to me.
Yes.
Every one of them. Not one of them did I think, oh, yeah, I have such fond memories about taking the SAT test.
You want to know what I have a fond memory of?
What?
John Fry's
environmental
studies class.
Uh-huh.
And we spent our time on the Kokosing River doing ecological assessments of the river. And our final assessment was to present at Kenyon College to an authentic audience of professors and people with ODNR. Awesome. And eventually the Kokosing River became a state scenic river. And you have some Mount Vernon roots, and you can think back when fish on the Kokosing, don't canoe on the Kokosing. It's a totally different environment now. Talk about authentic assessment.
I'll bet you also, and by the way, maybe the Kokosing River was anxious in that situation, but I'll bet you can also think about like a skill that you were attempting to master, and then you sought out a mentor. It might have been an athletic skill. It might have been a musical instrument or whatever. And then you look back on that assessment experience positively. In other words, you kept working with each other, and all of a sudden you saw these great growths. But, every teacher has heard, well, I didn't do well on that because I had test anxiety. So that this is a real thing. But the last thing I wanted to tell you was, it's interesting what you were saying, we want to prepare you for college. We want to prepare you for high school. If I went and have a dental procedure, I don't want the dentist to not be able to look at his phone to maybe get some information if he needs it, or call up one of his colleagues to get some information if he gets in trouble. Or I don't want him after 50 minutes to stop the procedure whether he's done or not. So a lot of times when we claim in a K-12 classroom that we are preparing students for something else with this assessment, I don't know how similar those experiences really are. So I agree. That was one thing that just kind of struck me when you were talking there. Now, what are some common mistakes? I mean, you've observed a lot of classes, my friend.
Well, I think you've heard, from just answering the last question, you've heard a little bit where I'm coming from. So I think common mistakes that we don't, we're making it an event versus it should be a temperature check in time of where is this student right now with respect to mastering the learning targets. And how am I going to provide different instructional strategies or something else to help them grow and move towards that, meeting that learning target? So more formative assessment. And this isn't research-based, but I'll use Pareto's rule. Like 80% of the time we should be formative assessing, which is a non-event. It's giving the student high-quality information, and it's the teacher getting information on how they can help that student grow. I think one of the things when I came down to your class, you gave me feedback on what I was going to present, and you gave it in short verbal snippets that you used an app on a slide. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to take this back to our teaching staff. What a great way to give feedback.
Right.
Assessment should not be for ranking and sorting. so that more that idea of an opportunity check, it's to provide feedback and adjust instructional strategies as needed to help students grow in their learning. The other bad practice, which kind of assessment tying into grading, is what's an F in terms of the every grade has a 10-point range, a 10 percentage point range, and an F has a 59 percentage point range.
Amazing.
But I would argue, because people get upset about if we give something and a student really did nothing. But everything in school backs down to a 4.0 GPA. Mm-hmm. Why don't we just grade everything on a 4-point scale? Then we can still give zeros, and that means they have not enough evidence of learning. I don't have insufficient evidence of learning is essentially what that zero means. Mm-hmm. But I should be actively trying to get getting information from that student, and they might not be proficient. It might be growing, or might be not yet mastered.
I like that. And, I'm so in favor of what you just said. And my students are too. And they're in the midst of still being students and being subjected to that 100-point scale. There's no way there's 100 levels on that scale. There's no way. Now, one thing I'm going to add to this, this wonderful promotion you just made, and I know I'm 100% confident that you are going to say absolutely Sturdivant. Absolutely. It's not just better for the kid. It's better for the teacher to use formative assessment, because what they can do, one of the hearts of formative assessment is feedback, obviously. Mm-hmm. And it gives you the opportunity to bond with these kids. And once that relationship is created, they just magically do better.
Absolutely. And I would equate this. You one of the pieces that in your assessment class, you had me talk about assessment in terms of teacher evaluation and teacher assessment is I've done many OTES teacher evaluations in my current role and in previous roles as a principal. Mm-hmm. All along the way, when I'm just giving feedback with respect to those domains, growth-minded feedback, positive and such, the conversation's great. It's rich. Right. But at the end of the year, when I have to go from just providing feedback to I have to give you a rating, right, that changes the dynamic of that conversation a little bit. And so I think as teachers, we should keep that in mind when we're just putting an A, B, C, D, F on a paper and versus the feedback we give.
Well, you know what? I'm a big promoter of audio feedback, like I put on your little Google slide presentation, and that's something that just get the MOTE, M-O-T-E extension, Chrome extension, any Google Doc, you can just highlight and start talking, man. It's really awesome. Now,
it is.
I'm really interested in this concept, and I wish I understood it better, and it's why you're here today. You advocate assessing the whole child. Now, in the intro, I do this little cheesy analogy where I talk about how my wife and I, we try to eat a Whole Foods diet, and it's much healthier. I couldn't resist. Take out the preservatives, all that crap. All right. So what exactly are you talking about when you are assessing the whole child? What does that mean?
Yeah. So I'm going to tweak that a little bit. I am an advocate of educating the whole child.
Well,
I don't want us to just get hung up on the assessment part.
Right.
And that educating the whole child means that as teachers, as administrators, we find avenues to support a student intellectually, physically, socially, and emotionally. And that really is, a year ago, became the centerpiece of the Ohio Department of Education's framework. So as Ohio educators, we should be doing that. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about, as educators, we have to find ways to meet students' social and emotional needs. Okay. That's their sense of belonging and hope. So I really think to Maslow and growing and growing that piece. And that goes back to the relationships that we talked earlier. Brandon Bastide, I don't know if he still works for Gallup for Education, but I saw him on behalf of Gallup for Education do a speech a number of years ago. And he said the single greatest indicator of success isn't a student's GPA, isn't a student's ACT score. It's not their class rank. It's do they have hope?
Yeah.
And he started to define that as a sense of belonging, and that a student has a relationship with somebody other than their parent or guardian.
Boy, that does sound like Maslow, doesn't it, man?
Yeah, it does.
Oh,
so I think that's so important. It really gets to that aspect of the social and emotional side of educating the whole child. And then I think in terms of growing the students' knowledge intellectually, physically, that's allowing students to use different modalities and methods for them to create and apply their learning, which goes to those higher order of Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge.
You know, I really like what you're saying here, and it kind of led into my next question, that last sentence that you said, because, you know, my method of doing this throughout my career was, you know, if a red flag went up, I knew a kid needed help, but I had to recognize that red flag. And sometimes I didn't. So you're talking about a more intentional, systematic approach by teachers. And that's another thing, like, on a teacher's plate that they have to worry about. Well, gosh, now I got to worry about these state standards. Now I got to worry about, you know, if the kid's, like, I don't know, content or happy or whatever. So how does a teacher do this? How does a teacher make sure that this student is well socially, emotionally, intellectually?
So building that relationship with each student, provide a sense of belonging. So for example, and I'm going to come back to I've mentioned restorative practices a couple times. So that could be beginning each week or class period with a circle at the beginning of class. So in restorative practices, we might be in a circle, and I have a talking piece, and I just have a simple question, maybe early on in the school year, like, tell me your favorite activity or tell me your favorite thing to eat. And as time progresses, you start to get to more layered, challenging questions, but you're nurturing a community in that classroom while at the same time giving students that sense of belonging, that somebody cares about them. You start to hear things that you might not otherwise hear in the classroom. So that's a specific example. And we have had some teachers in our district who've gone through that training that have started implementing that.
Right. How's that going?
Had administrators doing it. It's been great. And we've done it as an administrative team. Not as much this year with some of our physical spacing that we've done, but where we start our end of meeting with a circle. And it might be about the learning we're doing, but there's always a piece about, I want to get to know this team better.
That's great advice. And, you know, again, I think many teachers might have a real favorable disposition to this idea, but need more, like, guidance on what you just described.
And on that intellectually, physically piece, which could also incorporate the social emotional, there are a set of strategies. It's a research-based, it's sheltered instruction observation protocol. And it grew out of how do we help English learners be successful in the classroom, because they have limited to progressing knowledge of the English language. And so SIOP, one of the domains is about assessment, and it encourages multidimensional assessment. And what that essentially means is we're giving the students the opportunity for potentially written pieces, to do interviews like that one-on-one. I'm just talking through what I know with you. I might be using video clips. I'm giving creative outlets. It might be a discussion or a class discussion. It might be a performance. It might be group work. It might be project-based learning. So I love this idea of multidimensional assessment and multidimensional instruction, because I do think that gets at the essence of the whole child.
You know, I'm so glad you're on here. I'm so glad you're throwing out those ideas. And I want to put a link to what you just mentioned on the show notes. It's important. And then I loved earlier when you were talking about 80% of what we're doing should be formative. We should be, building those relationships, giving that feedback. I love that. Why do you think that formative assessment, I mean, I certainly agree with it, but why do you think it's so superior?
When I think about the feedback that I've received over the years as a administrator, a teacher, and a student, the things I value most is when I have that chance to get feedback, learn, grow, and improve my skill set. So I can go back to an economics class freshman year. It was honors econ. One of my favorite professors, Dr. Brown, and he was known on campus as being a rigorous professor.
Right.
I turned in my first paper and got it back. There was an F on it, and I hadn't seen an F in I don't know when, but it said, "Come see me at my office hours." Yeah. Now, so I went and saw him, and he gave me great feedback, and part of it was just I needed to grow my writing skill set, because that class had 3 grades for the whole term. And we could get down that assessment rabbit hole, and we won't. But he gave me great feedback, and I was able to rework that paper and turn it back in. And numerous instances like that of teachers that I've had, colleagues, that it's the feedback. I might have messed up. I might not have done something great, but they gave me growth-minded feedback, and that allowed me to improve. And I think our best teachers crave that. And we should want to give the same thing to our students. So we had a person come to speak to our teachers a number of years ago. It was more about behavior. But one of his phrases that stuck with me was, be firm on your intent. So to me, that's the learning target, the standard. Right. Be firm on your intent, flexible on your solution. Yeah. So that's the instructional strategies. That's the assessment. We don't have to do the same thing for all kids. We can do different things for different kids. We shouldn't be, somebody might say that's not fair. Every student's different. They're going to grow at different rates and different times. And it's not about me comparing this student to that student. It's about me growing this individual student.
Hey, I love this convo. I wanna wrap it up here, and this will be a little challenging for you. But at the end of my blog posts, I always do like this "what you can do tomorrow" thing, And so I want you to picture in your mind a teacher, and you can put out a mental picture of who this is, and that's fine. But I want you to say they're listening to this and they're thinking, okay, this is interesting information. How can I apply it to teaching tomorrow, the next couple weeks or so? Give them a couple bullet points. Like what's something that they can do tomorrow to improve their instruction?
So I would go back to something I said earlier, the multidimensional assessment, that providing students options to demonstrate their mastery. So instead of having, hey, we're going to have this traditional end of unit test where there's some short answer, extended response, multiple choice, I'm going to give 3 different options of how you can demonstrate mastery. I'm not leaving it totally open-ended, but I'm going to add 2 more options. So I think that's something that everybody, that they might not implement tomorrow, but hey, in thinking about my next unit, or it's the end of the school year, as I start to think about next school year and that first unit that I'm going to open the year with, and I want to hook students, what's a way I can do that?
Great. Great advice.
I think if the second piece, restorative circles, that if you could find a moment, I know time is precious, but taking 10 minutes at the start or the end of the week to make those connections with kids and build that community within your classroom could be a great approach. And
I love it.
There's plenty of information on both those things.
Right.
So that multidimensional comes out of PSYOP. There's a lot of great pieces out there on PSYOP, and the circles comes out of restorative practices.
I love it. And you know what? And you could definitely, I mean, we're about ready to wrap up this year. You could definitely start thinking about that for next year.
Can I give one more
of course.
Piece?
Yeah.
Is a school nurse in our district, this was probably 2 years ago, encouraged me to read the book called Late Bloomers,
right,
by Rich Karlgaard. And some of the pieces that I shared today are in reference to that book. Mm-hmm. But it really gets at sometimes so late bloomers is in reference to students or people that might really hit their stride later in life, and we might not do a good job in schooling or college of developing those learners who don't meet those early benchmarks.
And I bet there's a lot of young men in that category because they really seem to be late bloomers.
I mean, research does show. I mean, the author gives examples from male to female in all walks of life, but when you look at research, a male's brain doesn't typically finish developing until 25 or 26 versus a female, I think it's closer to 21 to 23.
Yeah. I've had high school seniors who looked like they were 10. Hey, Aaron, this is just wonderful. And I'm just going to recap. So on the show notes, you're going to see links for multidimensional assessment, restorative circles, and the book Late Bloomers. That's wonderful advice.
Awesome.
What are you going to do after this? What massive catastrophe do you have to solve after this?
I think it's curriculum budgeting for next school year.
Get some caffeine, man.
I plan to.
Hey,
thank you so much.
No, you've been wonderful.
It's been a pleasure being on the show with you.
And listen, he was talking about John Fry, his old science teacher, who's a friend of mine. And I'm going to send him this podcast. I'm going to make him listen to it. You've been wonderful, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
So here we are at the What You Can Do Tomorrow section. And, Aaron pretty much did my job for me. There's 3 things that you need to check out. One is this concept of multi-dimensional assessment. Now, I know we're getting near the end of the school year. You might want to try this in an upcoming low-stakes assessment, or you might want to wait till next year, but there's a link on the show notes. Next year, when the school year starts, think about this idea of creating a restorative circle to try to build relationships, build a sense of community inside your classroom. Once again, link on the show notes. And then finally, check out the book Late Bloomers that Aaron spoke so eloquently about. Again, there's a link on the show notes. Look, we need to change the way we do things. Assessment needs to be less like a death sentence and more like a growth mindset opportunity. Good luck tomorrow engaging your students.
Show notes for this episode can be found at jamesalansturnevant.com. If you enjoy Hacking Engagement, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes.